Hi, I want to say thanks to Robin and to Matt for inviting me back unprompted, which was really, really nice. It's amazing to be in a room with actual people, which has been a treat for a long time that I've missed. The History Retreat is always a favorite of mine, so thanks for having me back. As Robin said, my name is Arno Verhoeven, and I am based in the School of Design at the Edinburgh College of Art. Matt has asked me to not move, so if I feel like I'm bolted to the floor, it's for the purpose of the microphone and the camera, not because I wouldn't prefer to dance around like Donald was doing this morning. My talk today is it's about infrastructure, it's about complex infrastructure, but it's about energy, not AI, although I'm sure there's an overlap between the two. Energy is something I've been working on for a number of years now, and it's become, I think, a really interesting topic perhaps in the last couple of months. It's received an awful lot of publicity in the standard press, in The Guardian, and in the Daily Mail, and in the Mirror, for the fact that it's a real crisis, or so they say it's crisis. But I want to talk today about what I think is coming out of some of those conversations and what, as a designer, I hope to do. The talk is a bit about some work I'm doing, which is small scale, some work with friends in Toronto and Montreal, and hopefully which will lead to a bigger project that I would love to have colleagues at ISTE to work with. So my talk today is about the grid, or what constitutes the grid, panels, batteries, and plugs, but mostly it's about emancipatory narratives of complexity of the energy system futures. So as I said, 3 years ago, 2019, we were in Linlithgow, and I gave a talk, and it was really trying to understand this space between design fiction from Julian Bleecker and this notion of scenario building in like the Oxford scenario planning process. So these kinds of stories that we tell in different ways about the kinds of futures that we want to be engaged in, whether it's about constructivist futures, which are, I suppose, anticipatory, or the kinds of scenario planning futures, which are more transitory and technological development. This talk today is, I think, an extension of that, a reflection of that. We've had a lot of time locked down to talk about things. Part of my work, which has, I think, been ongoing since that time, has been looking at SDG 7, the Sustainable Development Goals. I did some work with Professor Jamie Cross, who is now at the Edinburgh Earth Initiative, but is in social anthropology. I'm sure many of you know him. He and I were in Kenya and in Burkina Faso a number of years ago doing some work on energy amongst displaced populations, and it was very eye-opening for me to see how the Global South lives with a fundamentally different infrastructure, or lack thereof. And this led to me integrating this into my own program of teaching in terms of how do we respond to this particular sustainable development goal, not for emancipating Africa or other developing countries, but how do we respond to this ourselves? Because our own infrastructure is rather flimsy and requires addressing. The update from the UN itself is that we are not meeting this goal. We are sorely behind on progress with emancipating our energy practices for achieving sustainable energy, which is clean, reliable, affordable, and available to all. These are some of their statistics from the 2022 Energy Progress Report. I think one of the most disparaging numbers I see there is the amount of investment in 2010 was equivalent to 11.2 US billion, but that's dropped to 10.9 US over a 10-year period, and given inflation, that's probably a significant drop. So we are actually, I think, falling behind on our ability to make a resilient energy system for everyone. So what does that mean? It means we have some work to do. And in particular, today I want to talk about, this is my electrical cabinet in my house, or it was, because it's been changed. But I've been working with some friends in Toronto, a gentleman named Matt Ratto, and another colleague at the Milieu Institute in Concordia, Bart Simon. We received a little bit of funding from Edinburgh Global to develop some kind of project, and we kind of spitballed and said, we find that there's a space that's missing. Matt in particular is an STS scholar who studied with Susan Lee Starr, And he's very critical of current disciplinary practices, working himself in a Department of Communication, and Bart, also an STS scholar, working in human-computer interaction. Is there a space to think about PhD training, which isn't necessarily discipline-specific, but could be facilitated more broadly across disciplines, which also meant, how do we challenge our methodological rigor in terms of what we want to teach students about how to do? And this started as, I suppose, a lively conversation about changing education, but it ended up, well, okay, great. How are we going to do this? What are we going to use as a vehicle to get this done? And we all have, I think, an interest in energy, and this came out of, this project came out of looking at these energy practices. Bart is working in Milieu with a number of PhD students making off-grid solar objects and solar-free devices, which don't work with batteries, but still allow HCI and computers to work within limits. And Matt is working with a number of an organization out of Lebanon called TechFugees, looking at how energy practices might be developed more widely amongst the people of Lebanon and more efficiently. I've been looking, I suppose, more directly in what's going on in Edinburgh, i.e. my own house, my own tenement flat, speaking with colleagues about energy and realizing that we have a real problem, particularly in Edinburgh, in terms of how we're going to manage this transition. We have some interesting stories that are being told. We have some interesting narratives that have emerged. And in a sense, these conversations with Matt and Bart have resulted in a paper for a really interesting group that I'd never heard of until this conversation with these two, called the ACM Computing Within Limits. There is a whole group of people saying we are well beyond our capacity to support what we're doing technologically, and maybe we need to reconsider how we do things. We've published a paper which will be presented at ACM Limits at the end of this month, and it's really looking at this space between photovoltaic imaginaries, a riff on the socio-technical imaginaries that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, and the notion of critical narrative. In that space, we're trying to say, what if we told different stories to different people about what we think our energy futures are going to be, and how would they receive that? And what kind of stories would they then tell us in return about the futures that they want? So there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of sharing, and there's a lot of, I suppose, imagining about what things can be, with a critical analysis on how are we going to actually get there. Not necessarily being techno-solutionist, but rather just being imagining and trying to build a consensus among people. So this is, I suppose, some of the work. This is from Chateau, a recent paper saying that, if for those, I'm going to assume everyone is familiar with the concept of socio-technical imaginaries, particularly in this room. So the work of Jasanoff and Kim, arguing that there are particular things in terms of the collective visions of the good of society. Two core aims underpin the perspective, and one is the collective social values that influence the design of technological systems, which is kind of what I end up doing, and techno-scientific projects that reflect normative commitments to social life and contain particular understandings of society. So here I am, I'm living in a tenement flat in Edinburgh, and I'm trying to say it costs me a shitload of money to keep my flat not very warm. I mean, it's quite scary how hard it is. As a builder, as a contractor, as a certified joiner, I find it really difficult. Tenement flats were not built for the 21st century. I suppose the chuckle means that everybody recognizes that. So they're drafty. They're noisy. They're squeaky. They're poorly constructed on the inside. They're built like brick houses that won't fall down on the outside. But this is compounded with the fact of if it needs to be retrofit and it needs to be re-insulated, if it needs to be rebuilt, there's a significant cost to that. Compounded recently, I suppose, with Ofgem lifting their price cap, suddenly what used to cost me 80 quid a month now is costing me over 200 quid a month, and I haven't changed. Actually, I have. I've lowered the thermostat, and it doesn't make any difference. But this is a particularly, I think, salient story. I've used more than the Guardian headline. I've noticed a trend in presentations today. A lot of people picking up on the Guardian. I wonder if there's something to be thought about there. So I threw in some other things like CNBC, the UK government for what it's worth, Bloomberg, and Ofgem themselves. I think everybody recognizes that there's an energy crisis, however we define crisis, but it's costing an awful lot, and it's going to get worse. This doesn't help us in any way with what Scottish government wants to do in terms of making a just transition. Because not only are they going to have to try and find a way to make it cost effective, we have to decarbonize. We have to address the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have to address our climate targets. So we're moving away from, I suppose, a grid approach that is highly carbon, where production is done through gas, coal, towards renewables, or as the UK government has recently claimed, it is clean energy, so that it would include nuclear. Development of wind farms, development of solar panels, development of different kinds of biomass, all through an electrified grid is the way forward. How do we electrify the current society so that we can take advantage of transitions in transport towards electric vehicles, EVs, more efficient energy houses? Everybody knows the story. Well, there's one way to do it is to rely on the grid, and the other way is to offload onto the individual consumer how they might want to do it themselves. So if the UK government is interested in emancipating us from carbon and fossil fuels, there is a second narrative, which is people want to be emancipated from the grid itself. And they want to produce their own electricity. They want to produce their own energy. Solar panels are now VAT free. Wind turbines, not so much, but wind turbines in an urban environment are rather problematic. You can get limited scale, but in terms of large-scale projects, apparently they're only problematic if they're onshore, according to Grant Shapps. Offshore is fine. We want to scale up that ambition, and we want to electrify the UK. The Scottish Government's Just Transition Plan is very clear that we've been through, particularly in Scotland, transitions before. We've transitioned away from coal, and it was rather painful. It was really difficult for many people of society because a lot of people got left behind. And to do it in a just way, we need to have a plan that allows for everyone to benefit, that skills are maintained, that people who are in most need of support receive it, and that no one is left behind. And that's what their transition plan is. There's no actual plan. There's a vision, I suppose, which is why it's a bit of a misnomer. But the premise is broken down into a variety of different things. One is a community access to renewable energy scheme, which is people learning to live off-grid, communities like Findhorn, the Isle of Egg, becoming more self-sufficient as community generating schemes, and then this fantastic image of this young man here learning how to live off the grid in Scotland. What I think is, for me, is, has this got a laser on it? Oh, it does. There's another particular trend which is called van life, which is really popular on Instagram. The idea of forgo any sort of infrastructure. I'm going to make all of my infrastructure mobile, and I'm going to live in my camper van. And I'm going to go up to Scotland because there's no rules, and I'm just going to park wherever I want. That's what right to roam means. And I'm just going to live off-grid. And this is becoming a very attractive, affordable, and alternative way of lifestyle. Except for those of us who are kind of stuck in between. So there's these two narratives that are going to free us from the shackles of fossil and bad energy or problematic energy. Either we're going to make the entire grid renewable, or we're going to offload and make everybody responsible for their own energy. You're all going to be eco-warriors, and you're going to have your own house, and you're going to have your own property, you're going to have your own wind turbine, you're going to have your own battery bank. Except if you live in something like this, which is the tenement flat I described before. There's not enough of a roof surface to put enough solar panels to allow a stair to generate their own electricity. I can't use a heat pump because it's not insulated enough. I can't put in a wind turbine. I can't actually change the fabric of this building one iota on the outside because the building I live in is listed. So I'm pretty much scunnered. I'm reliant on the grid, and I'm reliant on one thing, which is I can change my behavior. I can turn my thermostat down, I can insulate if I could afford it, I can put on thicker clothes. As some policy advocates have said, I should get more pets so that I can cuddle with them and I can keep warm, which is absolute insane, but it's being said. It's part of the narrative. So how do we prevent this? Well, the first thing you can do, I'm told, is I can install a smart meter, which I've done. So this is my smart meter now replacing my old one, and this is my little kind of dashboard which tells me exactly how much energy I'm using throughout the day. It's a misnomer to say that if I turn on my kettle I can see it spike. It doesn't actually work that way. It's a delayed response. You can see it go up, But I've got two things primarily that are reading on my meter. There's my gas boiler and my gas stove, and then the rest is the electricity, which, okay, I can see spikes over here on my Octopus app. I can see that, oh, that tall one there, that's the day I had to work from home. So I'm having to pay for that. That part there, that's probably what the university owes me for all of my Teams meetings. And this is my gas, 17 cubic meters in 5 days. And so for me, the space here is, what can I do about that? Well, what I can do is I can sit in my room and go, 17 cubic meters of natural gas in 5 days. I can visualize that. I'm a visual guy. That's an awful lot of natural gas coming from somewhere, but what can I do about it except shut off the boiler? I can't do anything. So this is not a narrative of emancipation. This is a narrative of something else. But I don't feel free or liberated to enact. I have no agency here to actually do anything about those numbers that are coming in. Has everybody got their smart meter, by the way? Not yet. It's free. This is what the government wants to give you, Robin. It's amazing. It's pointless. The nice story about this is a little gadget that for those tech people works on the Zigbee platform. So it's a 2.4 gigahertz little wireless thing. So you have a little wireless connector on your gas and a little wireless connector on that box there, and it sends a signal to this little thing, and it's about the size of a small iPhone or an MP3 player. And you can press buttons on it. It's got a touch screen, and it's battery operated so that you can carry it around the house. And so when I got it, I thought, oh great, a gadget. I love gadgets. I plugged it in, charged up the battery. Oh, this is cool. Look, I can see how much energy I'm using. La, la, la. And after about 5 minutes, it shut off. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? So I plugged it back in, and I thought, I haven't charged the battery long enough. I have to leave it overnight. So then I left it overnight, and I got up first thing in the morning, and I checked it out, and I unplugged it, and 5 minutes later, the battery died. And I was like, something's wrong here. I must have got a default one, a bug. So I called up the company, and I said, look, it says it operates on a battery, but I have to keep it plugged in because it's not working. Can you send me, this must be faulty, can you send me a new one? No, we're sorry, sir, but that's a known defect. What do you mean it's a known defect? Yeah, none of the batteries work. We're really sorry. It's a glitch in our little hardware bit. So you want me to measure my energy performance by keeping a device plugged in, but your advice is unplug all your devices that are on standby. But the one you give me to measure, I have to keep plugged in. How is this? And they're like, we're really sorry, sir. We know. And I'm like, this is what we're having to contend with. Anyhow, so heat pumps, how do I get one and how do they work? All kinds of conversation about heat pumps, to the extent that people are feeling afraid that actually the value of their house is going to drop if they don't have a heat pump installed by 2025. A heat pump, for those of you who aren't aware how it works, it basically pumps heat through radiators from outside by taking heat out of the air. It's like a reverse refrigerator, and then it pumps it through your radiators at a more longer term, but at a lower temperature. So it's supposed to have a more of a slow effect. Rather than a high spike, it waddles out. But if you live in a tenement flat like me, your radiators have to get over a certain temperature for actually any of the heat volume to generate in this room. This room in particular would be problematic for a heat pump because it would have to pump so much heat. Those radiators would have to likely be all the way around the skirting just to get the heat pump to work. So the emphasis here of the government saying get a heat pump is a false narrative yet again. It's a technology that's really amazing, but it's not going to work for everyone. And if I'm going to invest 15,000 pounds to do it, and it doesn't work, who's going to help me figure this out? Again, solar panels and heat pumps down to 0%. Buy now. Where am I going to put a solar panel in a tenement flat? Where am I going to put a heat pump? I cannot do anything. I feel not emancipated, which these narratives are trying to subscribe. I feel disenfranchised. And there's my flat. What a lovely place to live, except if you want to be energy efficient and you want to be responsive to climate crisis. God forbid you should have an electric vehicle, because I don't know how you're going to charge it on the streets of Edinburgh, because the infrastructure just doesn't exist. So this reminds me of when I was with Jamie Cross and we were in Burkina Faso and we were in Nairobi looking at some of the camps for displaced populations. This is the kind of things that in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals we would have to be looking at. It's like, how do we help people improve their ability to cook cleanly? How do you get kerosene lights out of really rusty and shanty town houses? Because it's bad, it's polluting, air quality is horrible. It's a fire hazard. How do you get people cooking off of open fires onto more sustainable systems like this solar cooker, which of course worked really well because they were very popular in the camp, not because they were actually useful for cooking, but it's a whole shed load of aluminum that they were taking apart and using to build other things. The UN was trying to figure out, why are they so popular? Why do people keep requesting solar cookers? They must be a real hit with people. They must be really liking that technology. But our research found they didn't give a crap. They liked to make lawn chairs out of these parts here, and they would make cold cellars with the panels to reflect the heat. This was a way of selling material in the form of an energy cooker, which once dismantled was no longer an energy cooker, but something else. Is this the future that the global north, is this what I'm looking at? Am I going to have to cook outside? Am I going to have to use a communal stove? I'm not opposed to that, but that seems to be a narrative that isn't coming through in terms of the government, in terms of our corporations that are fostering or helping us build an energy transition. This is what an electrical grid looks like in a refugee camp in Burkina Faso. This is hodgepodge, pulled together, ad hocist at its best. This is what they have to do to manufacture and work to the grid. In a sense, looking at this is not, if we imagine that this is our post-grid future, because the grid that we've developed was never designed, it's an organic thing that has evolved. So the idea of becoming self-sufficient and getting solar panels on your roof and feeding back into the grid with an FIT or a feed-in tariff to say, I can generate electricity and others can use it when I'm not. This doesn't understand the rhythm of our energy production because most of us don't use anything at night, but we use a lot during the day. And we have actually, in terms of electricity, almost no storage capacity. So we have an overabundance during the day when we're producing a lot. We have a grid that's not capable of reverse feed. And we're actually increasing or decreasing our resilience and moving more towards a system that looks like this. So this notion of the paper that Robert and Matt and Bart and I wrote had to do with how do we get to the meanings of stories that these people are telling. Not the people in distant lands who are struggling without the infrastructure and the luxuries I have, but the people who are living today in amongst ourselves who we're supposed to bring along who aren't able to either rely on the grid because it's not secure, rely on retrofit because it's not supported, or who aren't able to emancipate themselves by going off into the country, buying a large piece of property with a lovely cabin, and then sitting themselves up with independent capital. Actually, I would argue that most of us aren't able to do any of those things. So we're not bringing everybody along, we're bringing almost nobody along. But if we were to allow people to talk stories, rather than trying to do techno-solutionist approaches, what if we built STS approaches, socio-technical imaginaries, to say, look, tell us stories that mean something to you that are rooted in expressions of participants' lived experiences. Could we as designers use these stories? Can we use these narratives and these stories to reshape the predominant narrative into something else that does work for us? How do we not romanticize that when this is the real lived experience for other people who say, this is not a way to live? Why would we make this an option for people living amongst us in the north? I think we can do better. This, by the way, a really lovely story. It's very romantic, but it has all kinds of problems. First off, you don't have an address, so you won't have a passport. How you get your driver's license renewed without an address, living on the road, completely stumps me. So the system won't support that. And has anybody lived in a camper van for an extended period of time in Scotland? Like for 5 days in October? it's like it just piss pours rain all day. It's like, this is not fun. There's no sunshine in Scotland during the winter to live in a camper van. So these romantic stories, these romantic narratives, I think it's not that they need to be challenged because they're wrong. I think they need to be taken apart because we need to understand what's really going on behind that. So how do we move away from this idea that it's these two predominant narratives, one, and both I think to some extent are emancipatory narratives or fables, towards something that is actually a concrete plan that allows us to build a trust transition? How do we not say it's up to you as the individual in a neoliberal environment to buy the capital, live on the estate, and produce your own electricity independent from others? Or how do we not necessarily build a grid that is infallible, unreliable, and unable to produce and deliver what it needs? And this, I suppose, is the part where I think this is what I want to do. So this is my office. Many of you have probably walked past this. My office is not that big, actually. It's in that space. This is the Hunter Building at the Edinburgh College of Art. In terms of telling these kinds of stories and these social technical imaginaries, rather than them being purely imagined, there's a space where I think it would be really nice to situate them, because these narratives that we're talking about, these stories, are all situated in a particular place, in a camper van, in the country estate, in a wood cabin, in a tenement. How do we situate them and bring people to a space where we can share those stories, we can talk through those narratives of experience using that experience of that space? I've recently proposed to my head of school, after a beer or two, that what I thought would be a great idea would be, look, can I take my teaching studio off-grid? And he kind of looked at me sideways and he said, you mean you want to just teach online all the time? And I went, no, absolutely not. I want to be removed from the infrastructure. I want the electricity to be disconnected and solar panels put on the roof. I want a wind turbine. I want a heat pump. I want in-floor heating. I want a living wall. I want a gray water recycling system. I want to live in my studio as though it was an independent space. And he said, well, that won't work. And I said, I know. It's exactly why I want to do it. Because I want to have people come in and go, is this what you mean about emancipated energy futures? Because we need to figure out a different way. It won't necessarily work. Let's show people how hard it is. Let's make a living lab where people can come in of any discipline, whether it's the community who want to get involved, whether it's a contractor who wants to learn how to build, or whether it's an academic who wants to help progress this insight in through research, whether it's engineering and they want to strap something on our roof, or whether it's STS and they want to watch people play with social grids and stuff. Can we do that? And I thought, oh, he's awfully quiet. He thinks I'm completely bonkers. And then he went, and then we could do, and then we could, and then we could, and then we could. So this has been a conversation like Morgan. It's a very preliminary conversation. The beer happened at the end of January. Subsequently, I've had to write a whole plan. It's been approved by the estates. I've got partners from Edinburgh's estates to say, oh yeah, can we do more than one? Can we take what we learned from doing this and can we do it at other sites? Because not every site's the same. Retrofit is going to be very hard. How do we make it happen? So this is going to happen, apparently, unbeknownst to me. I now just have to write the funding bids to make the research program. So while I'm sitting here trying to say, I'm in the back writing my head of school going, yes, we need to meet the architects. Yeah, we need to rip down some walls. I'm also talking today to colleagues to say, one of the things I value about coming to the ISTE retreat is that it's not about a performative space. It's a commensal space. It's a space where we can share ideas and we can talk about works in progress, where we can exchange things that we know are interesting or perhaps interesting to others, where we can say, I'd really value a conversation about how I think colleagues in science and technology studies who are interested in energy and the infrastructure and the complexities of this would also like to participate and play. And that's my talk for today.